Please comment where you are watching in the world. So it was October, bloody cold, and I was on a dating app in Salem, Massachusetts. Of course I was bound to match with someone who was overly into spooky stuff, classic this time of year. But I'll be honest, Greg seemed harmless enough. His profile was quirky in that New England hipster way. Lots of flannel, a picture of him holding a cup of pumpkin spice coffee, and another of him standing in front of the witch house. I thought, he's leaning into the Salem vibe. That's okay. I wasn't a die-hard Halloween person, but I loved the history and charm of Salem. After some back-and-forth messaging about our favorite horror movies, he was Team The Shining, I was Team Scream. Greg suggested we meet at the Salem Witch Museum. It seemed like a safe, public place for a first date, and I was excited to get into the fall spirit. When I showed up, Greg was waiting outside, wearing a long black coat and a scarf. He had shaggy brown hair, a slight beard, and the kind of glasses that made him look like he spent too much time in libraries. "Hey, you must be Claire," he said, flashing a crooked smile. "Yep, that's me," I replied. The museum was packed with tourists, which made sense given the time of year. We wandered through the exhibits, making small talk about Salem history and laughing at some of the overly dramatic mannequins depicting the witch trials. Greg seemed nice, if a little intense. But then, as we were leaving, he said, "I have something even cooler to show you. My apartment's just around the corner." Now, I know what you're thinking. Don't go to a guy's apartment on the first date. And normally I wouldn't. But it was the middle of the day, and we were in downtown Salem. The area was bustling with people, and his offer sounded innocent enough. Plus, I was curious. "What's at your apartment?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. Greg grinned. "A piece of Salem history. You'll love it." Against my better judgment, I agreed. We walked a few blocks to a brick building that looked like it had been around since the 1800s. Greg led me up a narrow staircase to his apartment, which was surprisingly clean and smelled faintly of cinnamon. "This way," he said, gesturing toward a door at the end of the hallway. When he opened it, I froze. The room was filled with antique dolls. They were everywhere, lining the shelves, sitting on the furniture, even hanging from the walls. Some were porcelain, others were raggedy, and a few looked like they might have been handmade centuries ago. Their glassy eyes seemed to follow me as I stepped inside. "Welcome to my collection," Greg said, beaming like a proud parent. I laughed nervously, thinking this had to be a joke. "Wow, this is a lot of dolls." "They're not just dolls," he said, picking up one with a cracked porcelain face and a frilly dress. "Each one has a story." "Of course they do," I muttered, trying to hide my discomfort. Greg placed the doll back on the shelf and grabbed another one, this one missing an eye. "This is Annabelle," he said. "Like the movie?" I asked, clutching my purse. "No, the movie's fake," he said, shaking his head. "But this Annabelle? She's real. She's from the 1800s. Legend has it, she was owned by a little girl who—" "Okay, you know what?" I interrupted, backing toward the door. "I just remembered I have to, go feed my cat." Greg frowned, clearly disappointed. "You don't have a cat?" "Right, well, I have to check my email," I said, reaching for the doorknob. "Wait," he said, stepping in front of me. "I haven't even shown you the haunted ones yet." "The what ones?" "The haunted ones," he repeated, like it was the most normal thing in the world. "This one," he said, picking up a doll with a chipped nose, "is supposedly cursed. Every time someone touches it, something bad happens." "Great," I said, forcing a smile. "Well, I'd better leave before I accidentally touch it." "Claire, come on," Greg said, his tone pleading. "You're not scared, are you?" "No, I'm just busy," I said, practically yanking the door open. "Thanks for the tour, though." I bolted down the stairs, my heart racing. As I reached the street, I swore I heard a faint giggle behind me. I didn't look back. The next morning, I woke up to a text from Greg. "I hope you're okay," it read. "Why wouldn't I be?" I replied, confused. "You left so quickly," he said. "Sometimes the dolls don't like that." I stared at my phone, debating whether or not to respond. Finally, I typed, "Very funny," and hit send. But Greg wasn't joking. "They're protective," he wrote. "Especially Annabelle." "Okay, I am out of here. See you never, Greg." Here's the thing about dating in Orlando. It's a city built for tourists, not locals. So when you're trying to meet someone, the date ideas almost always revolve around theme parks, mini golf, or overpriced dinners at Disney Springs. I should have known that agreeing to a first date at Magic Kingdom was a recipe for disaster, but when Alex suggested it, I thought, how bad could it be? Alex seemed like a dream, at least on Hinge. Tall, tan, with a sun-bleached smile that screamed Florida boy. He worked as an engineer for one of the parks. Which one? He didn't say. Loved dogs, and had a picture of himself holding a chuo in front of Cinderella's castle. Let's add some magic to our lives, his bio read. Cheesy? Sure. But it worked on me. After a week of texting, he asked, "What's your favorite Disney ride?" "Space Mountain," I replied. "Perfect," he said. "Let's meet at Magic Kingdom. I'll get us in. I have a pass." Now, I should have been suspicious of a guy who picks Magic Kingdom for a first date. It's chaotic, full of screaming kids, and not exactly the romantic vibe I usually go for. But hey, free entry to Disney World? I couldn't say no to that. Alex told me to meet him at the front gates at 10 a.m. sharp. I showed up in my cutest theme park appropriate outfit, jean shorts, a Mickey Mouse tank top, and sneakers. He was already there, wearing a Haunted Mansion t-shirt and carrying a backpack that looked suspiciously heavy. "Hey," he said, flashing that $1,000,000 smile. "Hi," I replied, trying to ignore the fact that he was sweating through his shirt before we even got inside. Alex had a plan. "We'll start with Space Mountain, grab some Dole Whip, hit Big Thunder Mountain, and then Pirates of the Caribbean," he said, pulling a folded map out of his pocket. "Oh, and we have to do the teacups." "The teacups?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Trust me," he said, grinning. The first half of the day was fun. We rode Space Mountain, he screamed more than I did, ate Mickey-shaped pretzels, and bonded over our favorite Disney movies, his, The Lion King, mine, Beauty and the Beast. By the time we got to Big Thunder Mountain, I was starting to think this guy might actually be a keeper. But then we got to the teacups. "Are you sure about this?" I asked as we climbed into one of the pastel-colored cups. "Absolutely," Alex said, grabbing the spinning wheel in the middle. "Hold on tight." He spun that cup like his life depended on it. I was laughing at first, but by the time we hit the third rotation, I started to feel off. "Alex," I said, gripping the edge of the cup, "I think we need to slow down." "What?" he shouted over the music, still spinning the wheel. "Slow down," I repeated louder this time, but it was too late. By the time the ride stopped, I was dizzy, nauseous, and regretting every decision that had led me to this moment. "You okay?" Alex asked as we stumbled off the platform. "I think I need a minute," I said, leaning against a nearby trash can. "Let's sit down," he suggested, looking concerned. I appreciated the gesture, but as we walked toward a bench, Alex suddenly stopped in his tracks. "Hang on," he said, his face turning pale. "What's wrong?" I asked, but I didn't need an answer. Alex bolted to the nearest trash can and proceeded to vomit up everything he'd eaten that day. Mickey pretzels, churros, Dole Whip, it all made an appearance. "Oh my God," I muttered, standing awkwardly a few feet away while a family of 4 stared in horror. When Alex finally finished, he wiped his mouth with the back of his hand and looked at me sheepishly. "I guess I shouldn't have had that turkey leg," he said, attempting a weak smile. "Yeah, maybe not," I replied, trying to sound sympathetic but mostly just horrified. We spent the next hour sitting on a bench near the Carousel of Progress while Alex recovered. He insisted he was fine, but every time he stood up, he looked like he was about to keel over. "Maybe we should call it a day," I suggested. No, he said, shaking his head. "I'll be fine. Let's go do Pirates of the Caribbean." "Alex," I said, crossing my arms, "you just threw up in front of Cinderella's castle. I think we're done here." He finally agreed, and we made the slow, awkward walk back to the parking lot. "I'm really sorry about today," he said as we reached my car. "It's okay, Elite. Maybe we can try again sometime?" he asked, looking hopeful. "Sure," I said, not meaning it. I drove home that afternoon, replaying the events of the day in my head. Alex was nice, but the combination of spinning teacups and public vomiting was not exactly the magical Disney romance I'd imagined. The next day, Alex texted me. "Had a great time yesterday. Hope we can hang out again soon." And you guessed it, I did not bother replying. I didn't think I was the type of person to get sucked into any conspiracy theorist's orbit. But dating apps are weird like that. You swipe right, exchange a few messages and details, and before you know it, you're agreeing to meet a stranger who thinks the government is hiding aliens in the middle of some desert. His name was Paul, and we matched on OkCupid. His profile seemed simple enough. Amateur astronomer, sci-fi nerd, and chili enthusiast. Looking for someone to explore the stars with. We bonded over a shared love of the X-Files. He threw in a few nerdy puns, and I thought, okay, he's quirky but completely harmless. But then Paul suggested we meet in Roswell. "You've never been to the UFO museum?" he asked, sounding genuinely shocked in one of our chats. "Nope," I replied. "I've heard about it though. Isn't it just a bunch of touristy alien stuff?" "It's so much more than that," Paul said, his excitement practically radiating through the screen. "Roswell is where it all happened. The crash. The cover-up. The beginning of everything. I should have taken that as a warning sign, but instead I thought, why not? I'd been stuck in Albuquerque for months, and a road trip sounded like a fun way to shake things up. Besides, I'd never been to Roswell, and if nothing else, it'd make for a good story." We agreed to meet on a Saturday afternoon in front of the International UFO Museum and Research Center. When I arrived, Paul was already there, wearing a t-shirt with a cartoon alien on it, and what I can only describe as the most aggressive cargo pants I'd ever seen. "Hey," he said, waving enthusiastically. "You must be Rachel." "Yep, that's me," I said, smiling nervously. The museum was everything I expected. Cheesy alien mannequins, grainy black and white photos of flying saucers, and displays that looked like they hadn't been updated since the 90s. Paul, however, was in his element. "This is the actual newspaper from the crash," he said, pointing to a yellowed clipping in one of the glass cases. "See? First they admitted it was a UFO, and then they changed their story to a weather balloon. Total cover-up." I said, trying to sound interested. As we moved through the exhibits, Paul kept leaning in and whispering things like, "The Greys are the most common species, but the reptilians are the ones you really have to watch out for. And, some people think the aliens are already among us." It was mildly entertaining at first, but by the time we reached the gift shop, I was starting to wonder if Paul actually believed all of this. "You hungry?" he asked, holding up a souvenir mug with the words "I want to believe" printed on it. "Yeah, sure," I said, eager for a break from the alien talk. Paul insisted on taking me to a diner he called Authentic Roswell. The decor was straight out of the 1950s, with chrome bar stools, checkered floors, and plenty of alien-themed menu items. I ordered a cheeseburger. Paul got the Martian melt. "So what made you so into aliens?" I asked, trying to steer the conversation in a direction that didn't involve conspiracy theories. "My dad," Paul said, setting his sandwich down. "He used to take me stargazing when I was a kid. That's when I saw it." I paused mid-bite. "Saw what?" "The craft," Paul said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. I stared at him, waiting for him to laugh or say he was kidding. He didn't. "It was a few miles outside of Taos," he continued. "I was 8. My dad and I were camping, and I woke up in the middle of the night. There it was, hovering right above the tree-line. Lights, no sound. I'll never forget it." "Wow," I said, not sure how to respond. Paul nodded, his expression serious. "Ever since then, I've been trying to figure it out. What they want. Why they're here." Before I could change the subject, Paul leaned forward and said, "Do you want to see something really cool?" Sure. There's a spot just outside of town where people say they see UFOs all the time," he said, his eyes lighting up. "We should go." I hesitated. Driving into the middle of nowhere with a guy I barely knew didn't exactly scream, "Good idea." But Paul seemed harmless enough, and I figured it couldn't be worse than the museum. "Okay," I said, against my better judgment. We drove out of town, past barren fields and lonely stretches of highway, until Paul pulled over onto a dirt road. It was almost sunset, and the sky was a brilliant mix of orange and pink. "This is it," he said, parking his car and grabbing a flashlight from the back seat. "Cool," I said, stepping out and looking around. There was nothing but open land and a few scraggly bushes. It was eerily quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you feel like the world has stopped moving. Paul set up a folding chair and pulled out a pair of binoculars. "We just have to wait," he said, grinning. "For what?" I asked, sitting on a nearby rock. "You'll see," he said, scanning the horizon. We sat there for what felt like an eternity, the sky growing darker and the air colder. Every now and then, Paul would point to a distant light and say, "There, did you see that?" "It's probably a plane," I said, trying to hide my discomfort. "No way," Paul said, shaking his head. "Planes don't move like that." I was about to suggest we call it a night when something flashed in the sky. A bright, greenish light, streaking across the horizon. "What the hell was that?" I asked, my heart racing. Paul jumped up, his binoculars glued to his face. "I told you," he said, practically bouncing with excitement. "They're here." Before I could respond, the light flashed again, closer this time. It hovered for a moment, then shot straight up and disappeared. I stared at the empty sky, my mind racing. Was it a drone? A meteor? Something else? Do you believe me now? Paul asked, his grin wider than ever. I don't know, I admitted. Paul nodded knowingly. They don't show themselves to just anyone. You must have good energy. Right, I said, backing toward the car. Well, this has been interesting, but I think I should head back. Already? Paul asked, looking disappointed. Yeah, early morning tomorrow, I lied. Paul drove me back to town, talking the entire time about how life-changing the experience was. I nodded along, too freaked out to say much. When we got back to my car, Paul said, "We should do this again sometime." "Yeah," I said, forcing a smile. "Maybe." I never responded to his follow-up texts. If you're going to date in Gettysburg, you have to be at least a little okay with ghosts. The town's whole personality is built around being haunted, Civil War battlefields, spooky inns, candlelight ghost tours. It's all part of the charm. I've lived here my whole life, so I'm used to the ghost-obsessed tourists who flock to town every fall. But I never expected to go on a first date with someone so into ghosts that I'd start questioning my own bloody sanity. Enter the ghostly fanatic, Evan. We met on a dating app, and his profile was all history nerd-like vibes. He was a high school teacher, loved reading about the Civil War. After a few days of chatting, Evan suggested for us to meet up for a ghost tour. "It's the best way to get to know the real Gettysburg," he said. Now, I've been on a dozen ghost tours in my life. They're mostly just local college kids dressed up in old-timey clothes, telling the same handful of stories about soldiers who haunt the Farnsworth House or the Jenny Wade House. But Evan seemed really excited about it, so I agreed. We met at the town square on a crisp October evening. Evan showed up wearing a wool coat and carrying one of those old-fashioned lanterns with a real flame inside. "Why do you have that?" I asked, nodding toward the lantern. "It's more authentic," he said, grinning. "Authentic to what? Are we going to time travel?" I joked. Evan didn't laugh. "You'll see," he said, his eyes sparkling with excitement. The tour started off normal enough. Our guide, a woman in a bonnet and hoop skirt, led us through the dark streets of Gettysburg, stopping at various landmarks to tell creepy stories. Evan, however, kept interrupting with random historical facts. "Actually, that cannonball didn't hit the Farnsworth house during the battle," he said at one point. "It was probably moved there later to make it look more dramatic." The guide gave him a tight smile and said, "Thank you for that clarification." At first, I found it kind of endearing. He was clearly passionate about history, and I figured he just wanted to impress me. But then things got weird. When we reached the Dobbin House Tavern, Evan pulled out his phone and opened some kind of ghost hunting app. "What's that?" I asked, leaning over to look. "It's an EMF detector," he said, as if that explained everything. "Like for ghosts?" "Exactly," he said, holding it up toward the building. The screen lit up with random green and red dots. "See, there's definitely activity here." I stared at the screen, then back at Evan. "You don't actually believe in this stuff, do you?" "Of course I do," he said, completely serious. "The energy here is undeniable." Before I could respond, Evan started walking away from the group, holding his phone out in front of him like he was tracking a ghost on GPS. "Evan, where are you going?" I called after him. "I think there's something over here," he said, disappearing into the shadows. I turned to the guide, who looked just as confused as I was. "Does this happen often?" I asked. "Not really," she said, shrugging. Sighing, I followed Evan into the dark alley behind the tavern. He was standing completely still, staring at a brick wall. "Evan," I said, crossing my arms. "What are you doing?" "There's something here," he whispered. "It's a wall," I said. "No," he insisted, pointing at his phone. "Look at the readings." I glanced at the screen. The green and red dots were flashing wildly, accompanied by a high-pitched beeping noise. "Okay, but what does that mean?" I asked, humoring him. "It means we're not alone," he said, his voice low and dramatic. I rolled my eyes. "Evan, come on. The group is probably halfway to the next stop by now." But before I could drag him back, Evan pulled a flashlight out of his pocket and started shining it at the wall. "Do you see that?" he asked, sounding breathless. "See what?" "There's a shadow. Right there." I squinted, trying to figure out what he was talking about. It was just a wall. A plain brick wall. "Evan, there's nothing there," I said. "Yes, there is," he insisted, stepping closer. "It's moving." At that point, I was officially creeped out. Not because I thought there was a ghost, but because Evan was acting like he'd just stumbled into a scene from Paranormal Activity. "Okay, I think we're done here," I said, grabbing his arm. "But?" "Nope," I said firmly, dragging him back toward the street. When we rejoined the group, the guide was in the middle of telling a story about a soldier who supposedly haunts the Gettysburg Hotel. Evan, still clutching his lantern, leaned over and whispered, "I can feel it. The energy here is strong." I ignored him. The rest of the tour was a blur of ghost stories and Evan's increasingly bizarre behavior. At one point, he tried to communicate with the spirits using a flashlight. "If there's a spirit here," he said, holding the flashlight out in front of him, "turn the light on." Nothing happened. "Sometimes they're shy," he said, looking disappointed. By the time the tour ended, I was exhausted. Evan, however, looked like he was ready to spend the rest of the night prowling the streets of Gettysburg with his EMF detector. "This was fun," he said as we walked back to our cars. "We should do it again sometime." I forced a smile. "Yeah, maybe." When I got home, I blocked his number and deleted the ghost hunting app he'd convinced me to download during the tour. Dating in Austin is like ordering tacos at a food truck. Sometimes you get exactly what you wanted, and other times, well, it's an unpleasant surprise. This story? Definitely a surprise. I matched with Ryan on Hinge. He seemed sweet, a little shy, but overall sweet. Maybe too sweet. His profile had the usual Austin staples, and he was a huge Pokemon fan. He wasn't the most outgoing texter, but something about his awkwardness was kind of endearing. He admitted he wasn't great at dating apps and said he'd rather talk in person. So when he asked me out to grab coffee at Mozart's by the lake, I figured why not. When I got there, Ryan was already waiting with 2 iced coffees. He was taller than I expected, with messy brown hair and glasses that fogged up when he smiled. "Hey Emma," he said, handing me the coffee. "Thanks," I said, taking a sip. "This is sweet of you." The date started off great. We sat on the patio overlooking the water, talking about everything from our favorite local bands to the best breakfast tacos in Austin. I said Veracruz, he said Torchy's, both valid. Ryan was definitely on the nervous side. He kept fidgeting with his straw and laughing at his own jokes, but I found it kind of cute. By the time we finished our coffees, I was already thinking about a second date. "You want to take a walk by the lake?" he asked, glancing at me shyly. "Sure," I said. We wandered along the trail, the conversation flowing surprisingly well. Ryan told me about his job at a tech startup, his love for blues music, and how he'd moved to Austin from a small town in Kansas a few years ago. "I'm still getting used to the city," he admitted. "It's a lot louder than where I grew up." "Well, you're doing fine so far," I said, smiling. After about an hour, he walked me back to my car. "This was really nice," he said, shoving his hands in his pockets. "Yeah, it was," I agreed. Ryan hesitated for a moment, then said, would you maybe want to hang out again sometime?" "I'd like that," I said. We exchanged numbers, and over the next week, we texted back and forth. Ryan was still a little awkward, but he was sweet, and I appreciated how thoughtful he seemed. He asked me about my day, sent me links to songs he thought I'd like, and even remembered to ask how my big work presentation went. When he invited me over to his place for dinner on our second date, I was excited. "I make a mean spaghetti," he said. I showed up at his apartment, a small but tidy place in South Austin. Ryan greeted me at the door, looking nervous but happy. "Hey, come on in." The dinner was surprisingly good, simple but good. The spaghetti was perfectly cooked, and he even had fresh garlic bread. "Wow, a guy who can cook," I said, teasing him. "I only have like 3 recipes, but I make them really well," he said, grinning. After dinner, we moved to the couch to watch a movie. Ryan had picked a safe crowd pleaser, The Princess Bride. We sat close, our shoulders brushing, and after a while, he put his arm around me. "Okay, I thought this is nice." As the movie went on, we started getting cozier. A little cuddling turned into a little kissing, and soon enough, things were heating up. Ryan seemed nervous but eager, and I figured he was just shy. "You okay?" I asked, pulling back for a moment. "Yeah," he said quickly. "Totally." I smiled, leaning in to kiss him again. Things progressed naturally, slowly but naturally, and eventually I decided to take it up a notch. I reached behind me, unhooked my bra, and slipped it off. And that's when it happened. Ryan froze. Completely froze. His face turned bright red, and he immediately jerked back like I'd just pulled out a live grenade. I need to," he stammered, standing up abruptly. "Ryan," I said, confused. "What's wrong?" He didn't answer. He just grabbed his keys and bolted for the door, leaving me sitting on his couch, half-dressed and completely dumbfounded. "Ryan!" I called after him, but the door slammed shut. I sat there for a moment, trying to process what had just happened. Did I do something wrong? Was he suddenly sick? Did he forget to turn off the stove? After a few minutes, I texted him, "Hey, are you okay?" No response. About an hour later, I got a text from him that simply said, "I'm sorry. I can't do this." I stared at my phone, still in disbelief. What did that even mean? The next day, I finally got an answer. Ryan texted me again, saying, "I need to be honest with you. I've never, done anything like that before. I thought I was ready, but I'm not. I'm really sorry." It all clicked. Ryan was a virgin. Now, I have absolutely no problem with that. Everyone's on their own journey, and I respect people who want to wait. But he could have told me instead of running out of his own apartment, like I'd just unleashed the Kraken. I texted him back saying, "It's okay, but you should have just said something. No hard feelings." He replied, "Thanks for understanding. I think I just need some time to figure myself out." We never talked again, and honestly, that's fine. I will find someone who can accept my puppies. If you've ever dated in Austin, you know the city has a thing for spicy food. It's practically a personality trait here. Tex-Mex, hot sauce festivals, Carolina Reapers and tacos that leave you crying in public. So when I matched with Matt, a self-proclaimed chili connoisseur, I figured I was in for some heat. In more ways than one, hopefully. It had been a while, okay. Our conversations were fun, hot and flirty, with Matt constantly teasing me about my tolerance for spicy food. "Bet I can out-eat you in a chili competition," he said one day. "Oh, you're on," I replied. And that's how I ended up agreeing to a chili tasting competition for a first date. The plan was to meet at a local hot sauce shop that also served chili flights. They had a reputation for their spice challenge, which featured a lineup of increasingly fiery chilies, culminating in one so hot they made you sign a waiver before eating it. When I arrived, Matt was already waiting outside. He was tall, tan, and wearing a shirt that said Spice King in bold letters. "Ready to lose?" he asked, grinning as he gave me a quick hug. "We'll see about that," I said, smirking. We headed inside, where the shop owner greeted us with a knowing smile. "You two doing the spice challenge?" he asked. "Absolutely," Matt said, puffing out his chest. The owner handed us the menu, which listed 5 chilies, each one hotter than the last. "Start with the mild and work your way up," he instructed. "And remember, no shame in tapping out early." "Oh, we're not tapping out," Matt said confidently, throwing me a wink. We sat down at a small table, and the first round was served, a mild, smoky chili that was more flavorful than spicy. We both polished it off easily. "Too easy," Matt said, leaning back in his chair. The next 2 rounds were also manageable, spicy, but nothing I couldn't handle. Matt, however, was starting to fidget. "You good?" I asked, noticing him dabbing his forehead with a napkin. "Totally," he said, though his voice sounded a little strained. "This is nothing." Round 4 was where things got serious. The chili was labeled Inferno, and came with a warning about potential side effects like sweating, tearing up, and questioning your life choices. I took a bite, and my mouth immediately felt like it was on fire. But I kept my cool, determined not to let Matt see me struggle. He, on the other hand, was starting to crack. "Wow," he said, his face turning red. This is pretty intense." "You said you could handle it," I teased, taking another bite. "I can," he said quickly, though he was now openly sweating. By the time we finished round 4, Matt was visibly struggling. His eyes were watering, his nose was running, and he kept gulping water like it was going out of style. "You sure you're ready for the last one?" I asked, trying not to laugh. "Of course," he said, though his voice was shaking. Round 5 arrived with much fanfare. The chili, ominously named the Reaper, came in a tiny bowl and looked more like molten lava than food. The shop owner stood nearby, clearly enjoying the show. "Good luck," he said, smirking. I took a deep breath and scooped up a small bite. The heat hit me immediately, but I managed to keep my composure. Matt, on the other hand, was a disaster. He took one bite and immediately started coughing. "Oh my God," he said, his voice hoarse. This is insane." "You okay?" I asked, trying not to laugh. Matt nodded, but his face told a different story. He was sweating profusely, his hands were shaking, and he looked like he might pass out. "Maybe you should stop," I suggested. "No way," he said, grabbing his spoon. "I've got this." He took another bite, and that's when it all went downhill. Matt's eyes widened, and he let out a strangled gasp. He started, but he couldn't finish his sentence. Instead, he jumped up from the table and ran toward the bathroom. I sat there, stunned, as the entire shop turned to watch him go. After a few minutes, the shop owner came over and said, "You might want to check on him." I knocked on the bathroom door. "Matt, you okay in there?" "No," he groaned. "I'm dying." "You're not dying," I said, rolling my eyes. "Do you need water?" "I need a new tongue," he said, his voice muffled. Eventually, Matt emerged, looking pale and defeated. "I think I'm done," he said, avoiding my gaze. "Yeah, I figured," I said, trying not to laugh. We left the shop, and Matt spent the next 10 minutes apologizing. "I swear, I can usually handle spicy food," he said. "I don't know what happened." "It's fine," I said, still smiling. "Honestly, it was kind of hilarious." "You're not going to tell anyone about this, are you?" he asked. "No, of course not," I lied. We parted ways shortly after, and while Matt was sweet, I couldn't bring myself to go out with him again. Something about watching a grown man cry over chili just killed the vibe for me. Let me set the scene for you. Nashville, a city of honky-tonks, bachelorette parties, and a dating pool that's 50% aspiring country singers. It's not the easiest place to meet someone who's just normal. So when I matched with Adam on Hinge, I was very excited. Adam was a transplant from Chicago, working in finance, and had the kind of clean-cut, all-American look that made him stand out from the cowboy boot-wearing crowd. I felt very good about this. We talked and talked for about a week before he asked me out to dinner. "How about Rolf and Daughters?" he suggested, naming one of the trendiest restaurants in Germantown. I was impressed. Most guys I'd dated in Nashville thought a fancy dinner meant hot chicken and a PBR. When I arrived, Adam was already waiting at the bar. He stood up as I walked in, smiling nervously. "Hey Ellie," he said, giving me a quick hug. "Hi," I said, immediately noticing how good he smelled, some kind of woodsy cologne that made me want to lean in closer. The dinner was amazing. Adam was funny, attentive, and refreshingly normal. No weird red flags, no awkward silences, just easy conversation. We bonded over our shared love of indie music, our mutual hatred of touristy Broadway Street, and our favorite local coffee shops. By the time the check came, I was already imagining date number 2. "Do you want to come back to my place for a drink?" he asked as we walked to the parking lot. "Sure," I said, smiling. Adam lived in a sleek apartment downtown, with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city. It was the kind of place that screamed, "I have my life together," and I was impressed. "Make yourself comfortable," he said, pouring us each a glass of wine. We sat on his couch, talking and laughing, and before long we were kissing. It started slow and sweet, but quickly turned into something more heated. Adam was clearly into it, and I was too. He had that perfect mix of confidence and gentleness that made me want to see where the night would go. "Should we move to the bedroom?" he asked, his voice low and breathless. "Yeah," I said, smiling as he took my hand and led me down the hall. We tumbled onto his bed, kissing and fumbling with each other's clothes. I could tell he was nervous, but I figured that was normal. It was a first time, after all. But then nothing. Nothing. At first, I thought maybe he just needed a minute. No big deal, right? So, I kissed him again, running my hands down his chest, trying to keep the mood going. But Adam pulled back, looking embarrassed. "I'm so sorry," he said, shaking his head. "It's okay," I said quickly, not wanting him to feel bad. "We can just take our time." Yeah, he said, nodding. I don't know what's wrong. This never happens." I smiled reassuringly. "It's fine, seriously. No pressure." We tried again, and again, and again, and still nothing. By this point, Adam was visibly upset. "I don't get it," he said, running a hand through his hair. "I swear this never happens." "It's really okay," I said, sitting up and pulling the blanket around me. "Maybe you're just nervous." "Maybe," he said, sighing. "Or maybe it's the wine. Sometimes red wine messes with me." "Could be," I said, though I wasn't entirely convinced. Adam flopped back onto the bed, staring at the ceiling. "This is so embarrassing," he muttered. "It's not a big deal," I said, trying to make him feel better. "We can just hang out and talk. No pressure." But Adam wasn't having it. He sat up suddenly and said, "I think I just need some space." "Space?" I repeated, confused. "Yeah," he said, standing up and grabbing his shirt from the floor. I need to clear my head." "Oh, okay," I said, still sitting on the bed, unsure of what to do. "I'm really sorry," he said, avoiding my eyes. It's not you. It's me. I swear. Right? I said, starting to gather my clothes. Adam paced around the room, muttering to himself, while I awkwardly got dressed. Finally, I said, I think I'm just gonna head out. Yeah, he said quickly. That's probably a good idea. I grabbed my purse and headed for the door, feeling a mix of confusion and secondhand embarrassment. Ellie, Adam said as I opened the door. Yeah, I said, turning back. I'm really sorry, he said again, his face red. I don't know what's wrong with me. It's fine, I said, forcing a smile. Really? Don't worry about it. I walked to my car, half expecting him to text me an apology before I even made it home. But he didn't. The next day I got a single message. Hey, last night was really, really great. So sorry again about everything that happened. Hope we can hang out again soon. I stared at my phone, debating whether or not to reply. Finally, I sent back, no worries. Take care. And that was the last I ever heard from Adam. Guess I will be playing my own drum tonight. Buddy of mine wanted to get in the game, but is super cheap, so he was using plenty of fish, mistake one. Connects with a chick who seemed down to clown, so he, mistake two, invited her to his house. She immediately is upset that he doesn't have Tito's vodka, and that's the only thing she drinks. So she insists they go to the liquor store and get some. Now my buddy is 50-50 that he's going to get robbed, but the other 50% is a good chance of getting laid. So he compromises by telling her to drive and leaves his wallet behind. They get into her car, and there's no seat in the passenger side. She says she has a huge dog, so she took the seat out and just sit in the back. And they head off to the liquor store. During the drive, he comes to the understanding that this woman is drunk. He's still holding out for the sex possibility, though they get to the liquor store, and it's too late, closed. The chick says, I know a store they're open late, but the liquor stores are all state stores, they all have the same hours. She insists she knows a place, and he's captive in the back seat. She gets on the interstate, and a while goes by in silence, and he eventually asked, where are we going? And she screams in terror. She'd forgotten he was in the back seat. She tells him they're going to the liquor store in a city 30-minute away. Now he's almost given up on the failing hope of getting some strange, and just wants to live. Asks if they can just go home, and she screams again. Forgot he was in the car again. So he tried to keep a full conversation going to keep her awake and aware of him, and they eventually get to the destination magic open liquor store. It was closed. She insists it's open and goes to the door and starts pounding on it. Now comes the peanut gallery. Some Mexican guys are sitting in a truck drinking beers and yell at her, that's closed. You want a beer? And she starts yelling racial slurs at them, and not even the right ones for Mexicans. Now 3 Mexicans and a drunk/high/bipolar chick are trading profanities. And my buddy finally reached sex chance equals 0% point and just walked away. Turned around the corner and sat down at a bus stop and called me. It's like 1 a.m. on a work night, and I see the call and like, this can't be good. So I drive to get him. He tells me this whole long story that I honestly can't remember half of. It was much worse. Then we drank at his place until dawn and called in sick to work. On top of this story, here is another. Not a date, but rather a girl I was hooking up with at a party. And it's kinda long, but I just think the whole thing was so weird it's worth sharing. We were in her kitchen and we begin to make out, and suddenly she starts talking about how her best friend is totally in love with her, but she keeps kissing me while saying so. Then she elaborates by saying, yeah, my best friend is outside in the party, and I'm like, whoa. Well, should we stop? She goes, no, and I'm kinda uncomfortable anyways because I've been the best friend and I kinda wanna stop. She goes, no, it's totally fine, and then keeps going on about it. Lick really going into detail, and tells me the whole story about how she liked him, but then she didn't, and I'm like, okay. And before I can decide what to do, the best friend walks into the kitchen. He goes, I'm sorry, and then walks out. Normal, uncomfortable situation, right? Well, this happens at least 3 times. Like, he keeps walking in and going, sorry, dude is clearly drunk at this point. So the 3rd time I'm like, nah, dude, you guys clearly need to talk. I'll just be outside, you figure out stuff. And the girl holds my hand and makes me stay, but then starts talking to him, and like, she wants me to be a 3rd neutral party or something. She begins to tell him that she didn't like when he did so, and she asks me, what do you think, while holding my arm tightly and not letting me go. I said fuck it, and just end up playing along and actively listening to them and trying to help them. I'm a teacher, so I guess I'm good at that. Long story short, I managed to get out of that situation eventually. We go outside, and a few hours later people start leaving. so I go back to her apartment to grab my stuff. Of course, she comes back with me, and now we're all alone in the apartment. We go back to the kitchen and things start getting hot again, when suddenly we hear a knock on the door. And guess whose voice we hear outside? Yeah, of course, her best friend. So I'm like, okay, yeah, no, that's it, bye. And as I'm about to leave, she stomps her feet on top of the couch, putting her leg between me and the door, and asks me, so what are we? And I'm like, nothing. We just kissed, and listen, I'm sorry, I just went through a breakup, so I'm not really looking for anything more than that right now. I'm sorry if that disappoints you. And that was true, but also I didn't want to get into that whole mess at all. She goes, but can we still mess around some more? And before I can say anything, the best friend knocks again. So we open the door and he is there, and then he says sorry again, and I say, chill, I'm leaving anyways. And before I can go down the stairs, the girl calls me up and goes, my friend is too drunk. Can you make sure he gets home safe? And since I can't for the life of me say no to that, I end up in a cab with him 5 minutes later. During the trip, he starts telling me how much he loves her, but that she hurt him, and so on and so on. And I can totally understand the guy because, again, I've been in his position, but at this point I just want to get home and forget about the whole mess. But I have to make sure he gets home safe, so we stop in front of his house. And as he is about to leave, he turns around and says, please take good care of her, she is happier with you. He gets off the car and walks off into the night. A month goes by, and I see both the girl and her best friend walking down the street holding hands as a couple. Well, it wasn't so much that she wanted to do what I now know as the daddy/little girl game, and that she actually literally identified as a 4-year-old, age play I think they call it, or that she was clearly still obsessed with her ex, or that after all this coming out on the second date, she proceeded to divulge that she had been raped many, many times, in graphic detail. It was so excessive that there's no way it was true, but when someone tells you that kind of thing, you want to give them the benefit of the doubt. We ended up back at some relative's house, and just as I was about to bounce, I realized she was already really drunk, despite only having a couple of drinks. She was a pretty tiny girl though, and then she began to talk about Sweeney Todd, the demon barber of Fleet Street. No, it wasn't any of the previously mentioned things. It was Sweeney Todd that led me through one of the most bizarre experiences of my life. Apparently it was the greatest play ever penned, blubbered out in a grand drunken dissertation that probably couldn't be rivaled by even the greatest booze artists of our time. I admit, I was captivated in some morbid way. I stayed and sipped on my drinks as she went further down a rabbit hole that, as it existed within her, had no bottom. It was like watching someone who wrote their thesis on the thing, but was promptly failed vent about the injustice of it all. And I imagined she would have failed because she handed the thesis into a technical writing class while drunk. This is how discordant and obtuse it all was. By my guess, the only type of person still willing to listen to what was becoming more obviously a compulsion evolved far beyond impulse were strangers. The other people present had expressions like it was happening for the 1000th time, and they were powerless to stop it. And I was powerless to look away. Such a passionate, fervent, elaborate, and frenzied car crash. Then she started singing. And did she ever sing? She fell over regularly, and her words were so slurred, and her physical movements so slothful and blurred, that I knew I was in for a real show. She did the whole play. From beginning to end, every part, each character with their own voice. She was mostly naked by the time it ended. I sat there and cheered her on, and tried to stop her drinking, and stoked the fire pit in the backyard of this stranger's house. She didn't miss a beat, a line, a gesture. Even when I went to the can, the neighbors hollered and the dogs barked, and I was beginning to wonder if I wasn't dreaming or something. I had never before nor since seen someone so in love with a piece of art as this crazy little French girl was. I was almost envious that I didn't feel that way about something. When she finally wrapped up and I told her to take a bow, she toppled over doing just that and proceeded to crawl over to me in my chair and try to initiate a blowjob. I laughed, picked her up, carried her in the house, and dumped her on the couch. Didn't even bother saying goodbye. I knew she wouldn't remember it anyway. I walked back to my truck laughing and contemplating the sheer absurdity of humanity, knowing I'd never see anything like that again. Wherever you are, Michaela, I hope you're doing okay. I hope you found your daddy, and life's a little smoother for you. But it probably isn't. Blessed be the mad ones. On top of this story, here is another to add. We matched, he said I was cute, and asked how small I am. I gave him my height/weight, and he replied with something like, "That's so hot." He then asked who I lived with, and learned I live alone. He said he had roommates, and wanted to come over to my apartment. I told him that I would only meet him in a public place. If that went well, I might invite him over, but considering that my size and that the city's pretty gritty for an itty-bitty pretty boy, I never invited people I hadn't met to my home. I thought he was cool. He sent flirty texts for about a week before I suggested we meet at a coffee shop at noon on Friday. He asked me to name the location. I did, but he said he couldn't get there on his lunch break. I said, since you are the one with time and location restraints at that time of day, why don't you pick the cafe? He said he wanted to meet at my apartment. I told him no, and asked if he'd pick a coffee shop. I think he joked about meeting at my place for the third time. I named a coffee shop and said that I'd meet him there at noon, if I got confirmation. This was around 10 a.m. on that Friday. I hadn't heard back from him by 11, and realized that I didn't want to meet this guy. I have to remember that because I'm openly trans on my dating profile, people may target me for assault. The first thing this guy did was confirm that he's large enough to overpower me. He then asked to meet me at my home, where I live alone. Even after I was very clear that I would only meet him in a public place, he kept joking that I should invite him to my apartment. He could have been a dumb, horny guy, but he also could have been someone targeting me for assault. I went home and picked up a work gig. I was out of cellular service for an hour, and had a lot of messages from him when I returned. He said that the app wouldn't let him text me all morning, and he was sorry, but still wanted to meet at my apartment. After all that, he still refused to meet me in a public place. It freaked me the fuck out. I told him that I didn't want to meet him anymore, and deleted the app. I have a couple of stories. First was the time when I was trying to meet up with a 24-year-old woman, and instead, there was a 40-plus-year-old man. His logic was that since you already came here, you'd want to hang out anyway. Except I didn't. I left quite rudely. Then there have been the constant times gay men have sent me very vulgar messages, talking about how they would pleasure me, and some of them actually made me feel physically ill because of the descriptions. This is very odd, considering I always advertise I am a straight male, but apparently to some guys, straight means in the closet. Let's see, what else? Oh, there was the date with literally the most boring woman on the planet, who also lied about her looks. When I met up with her, not only was she a little bit hard to look at, lot of wrinkles for a 30-year-old, but she was literally so boring. She literally had nothing to say about herself aside from, I like to read, and I sometimes drink wine. She mostly wanted me to constantly talk about myself, but I needed some form of response from her aside from practically blank stares. Then there was the woman who was quite clearly not from the US and, well, this one was a bit odd. She sent a picture of her hair, saying she took it last week, and when I showed her that the picture was from 2001 and plastered all over Google, she insisted it was her hair. She kept trying to have me call her and gave me, for different phone numbers. She kept insisting on a meet up, and despite me saying, no, you have not been truthful, I do not want to meet up, she kept thinking I wanted to. I'm not entirely certain what her motive was, but I'm glad I never met up. Then there was the time I met up with this blonde woman. We decided to go to dinner, and literally within the first minute of us sitting down, she pulls out her phone and starts talking to a friend. For nearly 10 minutes this happens until she stupidly said, yeah, I'm on a date with this loser. I'm gonna make it seem like I'm gonna let him have me, but just use him for a free meal. Honestly, who the hell admits that on a phone conversation during the date? When I got up to leave, she got a little pissy, until I quoted exactly what she said. That's when she turned rather red, starting to yell how I shouldn't eavesdrop on people's phone conversations. I simply left. I should also mention I picked her up. She didn't have a car with her. Another story to share. 2 years and 2 states later, I'm still a little hesitant about posting this date. Wait, I'm getting ahead of myself. I don't understand why anyone posts decade-old profile photos. I'm a curvy girl. If a guy isn't into that, I'd much rather he politely ignore my first contact email than do a disgusted double take when he first sees me. Gentlemen, it doesn't matter how good you looked 10 years ago when you had more hair and less belly. If your photo is so out of date a woman can't recognize you, I promise there is no hope she will look past your flabby exterior and see the shining human being within. Instead, she's going to take one look at you and assume everything you've told her is a lie. Don't be that guy. Officer Creepy was succinct, flattering, and interested in meeting over dinner, his treat. At the time, I thought any excuse to visit one of Bardstown Road's tastier houses of meaty delights was a good one, so I agreed to meet him on a nice, unromantic Tuesday. Based on his profile, I expected a slightly straight-laced, pleasantly plump, curly-haired man 8 to 10 years my senior. When I showed up, the restaurant was full of the usual Bardstown Road crowd of hipsters on dates, young professionals out for a night of adventure, and cheerful tables full of heavily tattooed and pierced people who work on the strip. I took a seat by the bar and let the waitress know if I was here for a first date. If he stood me up, I'd order some empanadas to take home. Internet date? She leaned in conspiratorially. Is there a special rescue signal I should know about? This is one of the reasons I loved first dates on Bardstown. I grinned and gave her the Vulcan, live long and prosper salute. Suddenly, a hand clapped on my shoulder. Let's take this outside. The bald, jolly stranger behind me was older than my father. Excuse me? Chris Rachel, and I will take a large carafe of sangria and a table outside, he told the waitress. It all started with a Tinder match. I should have known better. Tinder is notoriously the Wild West of dating apps, where the odds of meeting someone normal are about the same as winning the lottery, if not more. But I was bored, lonely, and apparently too optimistic for my own good. Her name was Jessica, or at least that's the name she gave me. Her profile was standard. She seemed harmless, maybe even a bit fun. We messaged back and forth for a couple of weeks. She seemed nice, quick wit, decent banner, into same Netflixy shows as me, and she even asked me questions, which is rare on dating apps. After a few days, she suggested we meet up. I agreed without hesitation. The plan was easy: meet at her place, then go grab drinks at a local bar she swore by. It's the best spot in town, she'd said. I didn't think much of it. I figured it'd be a fun night out, and if it didn't work out, no big deal. At least I'd tried. But when I pulled up to her apartment complex that evening, the first red flag hit me like a brick to the face. She opened the door, and I swear, I didn't even recognize her. I stood there for a solid 3 seconds, trying to process what I was looking at. Her pictures had clearly been taken years ago, back when she looked entirely different. I mean, I'm not shallow, but there's a difference between someone looking slightly different in person and someone looking completely unrecognizable. It wasn't just the angle trickery or a little extra makeup. This was full-on catfishing. "Hey," she said, grinning like nothing was amiss. Hi," I managed, forcing a smile. At that point, I was already regretting the drive, but I didn't want to be rude. Maybe she's really cool in person, I told myself. Maybe looks don't matter that much. Spoiler, looks didn't matter, but the personality did. We drove to the bar in her car. Her idea, since it was close to her place and she knew the best parking spots. The place was packed, the kind of trendy spot where everyone's yelling over the music and trying to act cooler than they actually are. I figured I'd at least enjoy the atmosphere, even if the date didn't go well. We ordered drinks. I went for a simple whiskey and Coke. She ordered a double vodka cranberry. Bold choice, I thought. She downed it in about 5 minutes and immediately ordered another. By the time I was halfway through my first drink, she was already sloppy, like full-on slurring her words, giggling at nothing, and swaying in her seat. I watched in disbelief as she spilled a little of her second drink on the table and laughed like it was the funniest thing in the world. "Maybe you should slow down a bit," I suggested, trying to keep my tone light. "Oh, please," she said, waving me off. "I can handle my liquor. You're such a lightweight." I blinked. I haven't even finished my first drink. At that point, I knew I was done. There was no salvaging this. I made the decision right then and there to stop drinking entirely, so I could drive home. I spent the rest of the night sipping water and watching her down drink after drink, ignoring my increasingly gentle, and then not so gentle, suggestions to ease up. Somehow, she convinced me to stay until the bar closed. By then, she was a total mess, tripping over her own feet, shouting random things at strangers, and slurring incoherent stories about her ex-boyfriend, who I gathered was both the worst guy ever and someone she still kind of missed. I felt like I was babysitting a drunk toddler. When we finally got back to her place, I was beyond ready to leave. I helped her up to her apartment, made sure she didn't fall over, and told her I was going to use the bathroom before heading out. That's when things went from bad to insane. When I came out of the bathroom, she was standing in the middle of the living room, holding my car keys. "You can't leave," she said, her voice thick with alcohol. "What?" I asked, confused. "You've been drinking," she said, waving the keys at me like a parent scolding a child. "I'm not letting you drive home drunk." "I'm not drunk," I said, trying to keep my tone calm. "I stopped drinking hours ago. I've just been drinking water." "Nope," she said, shaking her head. "You're wasted. I can tell." You're slurring your words. I wasn't slurring my words. She was. Look, I appreciate the concern, I said, reaching for my keys. But I'm fine. I promise. She snatched the keys away, stumbling back a step. No way. You're either sleeping here or on the couch. Those are your options. I stared at her, completely dumbfounded. Was this actually happening? Jessica, give me my keys, I said, my voice firmer now. No, she said, crossing her arms like a stubborn child. I realized then that I wasn't going to get through to her. She was too drunk and too irrational to listen to reason. And I was too tired to argue. So I sighed and said, fine. I'll sleep on the couch. She grinned like she'd won some kind of victory and tossed a blanket onto the couch before disappearing into her bedroom. I laid there, staring at the ceiling, wondering how my life had come to this. The couch was lumpy and smelled faintly of stale beer, but I didn't care. I just wanted to get through the night so I could leave as soon as possible. I didn't sleep. Not really. I dozed off for maybe 20 minutes at a time, but every creak of the floorboards or sound from outside jolted me awake. By the time 5 a.m. rolled around, I'd had enough. I got up, marched to her bedroom, and knocked on the door. Jessica, I said, my voice sharp. I need my keys. Now. She groaned from the other side of the door. Ugh, it's too early. Go back to sleep. No, I said. I'm leaving. Give me my keys. She finally stumbled out of bed, her hair a tangled mess, and glared at me. Fine, she said. Let's look for them. We spent the next 20 minutes tearing her apartment apart. I checked the couch cushions, the kitchen counters, even the bathroom, but the keys were nowhere to be found. Are you sure you didn't leave them in your car? She asked, slurring her words again. I didn't, I said, barely keeping my frustration in check. And then, as she reached into her sweatpants pocket to grab her phone, my keys jingled. I stared at her, dumbfounded. Are you kidding me? They've been in your pocket this whole time. She looked down at the keys in her hand and shrugged. Oops. I didn't even respond. I grabbed the keys, stormed out of her apartment, and didn't look back. Okay, he knew my name. Either this was my date, or I was finally about to be recruited into a secret government agency. Come on, Shield. Please be real. I've always wanted to live on a helicarrier. Sadly, it was my date. He carried the sangria out and poured for me. I drank nervously while looking over the menu. He silently topped me off, carefully watching me drink. You look a little different than I expected, I said. He looked at me like I'd just revealed a state secret. They said to use my best photo. When was that one taken? In the photo, he leaned over the edge of a boat floating in front of some mountains. Now, I suspected he'd have a heart attack if he tried to hike a mountain and would sink straight to the bottom of a lake if he tried to swim. When I was 42. What year was that? His profile said he was 44. The last 2 years must have been very hard on him. He glared at me. 1996. I sighed. He was older than my father. He topped off my glass again. What do you think I do for a living? I really couldn't guess. A desk job. He obviously didn't get much exercise. He crossed his arms. I'll give you a hint. You wouldn't be here if you knew. Garbage collector? I guessed. Try again. Accountant. I'm serious, he growled. So am I. I suck at this game. Just tell me, what do you do for a living? I'm a police officer. He refilled my sangria. I noticed he hadn't taken a sip of his own. Great. He topped off my glass every time I took a sip. I tried to gauge whether or not I'd had a whole glass yet. Just to be safe, I knew I was trapped for at least 2 hours if I didn't want to risk him accusing me of drinking and driving. I reached into my purse to try and summon a rescue. Turn off your cell phone. I don't want you texting all through dinner. There went my primary lifeline. Moving very slowly, I did as I was told. The waitress emerged to take our orders. I tried holding up my Vulcan salute slightly behind his head, but his eyes flickered to my reflection in the restaurant's window. He pulled out his badge and showed it to the waitress. Bring us a pitcher of water and come back for our order in 15 minutes. She promptly disappeared, avoiding eye contact with us both. Once she was gone, he got down to business. I took down your plates after I saw you get out of your car. Let's get something straight. I've seen your blog. You're not writing about me. If you do, I'm sure a girl like you has done things you regret. You don't want to regret them more. My eyes widened in shock. Nothing makes a date go better than liquoring a girl up and threatening her. I only write about the bad dates, I reminded him. Honestly, most of my dates are just plain conversation. We don't really feel a spark. We go our separate ways. No harm done. I gave him an optimistic smile. He laughed bitterly. How a date ends is always up to the woman. I couldn't quite tell if that was a threat, a suggestion, or both. He topped off my sangria again and looked me in the eyes. You'd regret writing about me. It's a bad idea. Now take a drink. Relax. I dutifully put the glass to my lips. Over the next 2 hours, I learned that after his upcoming retirement, he fantasized about building an isolated house on a cliff face in Chile, where supplies would be delivered by donkey once a week and no one would bother him. I pointed out I'm a city girl who loves living in a walkable neighborhood with my own corner bookstore, restaurant, and bar where the staff knows me. I learned he resented people with advanced education because, according to him, the only purpose of an academic degree was to indoctrinate people into the liberal agenda. I pointed out I listed my MA in history on my online profile. I learned he thought the space program was a stupid waste of money. I pointed out I follow the X Prize religiously and covet stock in Bigelow Aerospace. Under other circumstances, I would have left over an hour earlier, but I wasn't sure how to get away from Officer Creepy without being accused of a DUI. I hadn't touched my sangria since his revelation. After a while, I had to know, listen, I asked as politely as I could. I'm pretty honest on my profile. I'm a liberal, overeducated, geeky city girl. We don't have anything in common. Why did you write to me? Girls on OkCupid put out. The horror in my face must have fazed him. He grunted and looked away. Never mind. You're fatter than I expected. That was the first good news I'd heard all night. I'd rub mud in my hair and roll around in trash if it would get me out of this horrifying date. I like lanky tech nerds built like a sack of hangers. This conservative cop was not only older than my father and willing to lie about his age and interests to con a woman into meeting him, but he had the graceless figure of an overripe pumpkin. I scrambled to come up with an appropriate response that would save face for him without resulting in retribution for me. It was really interesting meeting you, but I'm looking for a relationship, not a one-night stand. I'm sorry you wasted your evening. Let me buy dinner. Get the sangria too. The carafe sat untouched since he revealed he was secretly a cop. I felt lucky he didn't tell me to buy him a gift certificate and a box of donuts. I waited silently while the waitress boxed up both our dinners for him to take home. This better not show up on your blog. While I waited to sign the debit card receipt, he huffed off to find some other women to intimidate. Once he was gone, the waitress topped off my carafe of sangria before sealing it with aluminum foil and a rubber band. Take it home. She gave my shoulder a sympathetic squeeze. You look like you could use it. I was in my early 20s and nowadays would have not put up with any of the shit I did, lol. He picked me up from my house. I walked out wearing heels, and he made me go back inside and put on flats because apparently I was taller than him with heels on. Nowadays, that is when the date would be over for me, lol, but I did it. We drive to the restaurant. It's a casual spot, kind of like a pub, but with fancier food. We sit down and order our drinks, and there's a table next to us of like 6 guys, all wearing jeans and camo or plaid, hillbilly-looking types. My date starts loudly talking shit about how ugly their clothes are, and the guys keep looking over at us like WTF. I told my date to stop because he was about to get a country boy beat down, lol. The waitress comes to take our order, and he orders for me. And it's something I don't want, so I say oh no thanks and order something else. After the waitress left, he was literally red in the face, fuming, not saying anything, and just staring at me. I awkwardly drank my beer until he said, "Don't you ever do that to me again," and launched into a rant about how I embarrassed him in front of everyone. He was being so loud and everyone was staring at us, and I just wanted to melt into my seat, lol. The food comes and he asks for the check. I offered to pay my half because I did not want to ever see him again, and I didn't want to give him a reason to feel like I owe him something. He goes off on me again about how I need to be trained to be a better woman, how I'm embarrassing him again, just tearing into me. I excuse myself to go to the bathroom, which is across the building and around a corner out of view. I was frantically texting everyone I knew trying to get a ride home, and planned on leaving without him seeing. One of the country boys from the table next to us followed me to the bathroom and knocked on the door asking if I was okay. I came out and spoke to him, and he offered to drive me home, so I took it. I get in this guy's old beat-up truck, and he gives me a cigarette and takes me home and makes sure I got into my house before he took off. Lovely guy. 5 minutes later, my phone starts blowing up, and it's my date. I guess he started losing his shit when he realized I was gone, and found out I got a ride home from one of the guys he was insulting earlier. Accuses me of being a whore and sleeping with this guy. I blocked his number. He shows up at my house. Now he's banging on the front door so hard I'm afraid it's going to come off its hinges. I lived with 3 male roommates at the time, but none of them were home, so I called the house group chat and begged for one of them to come home. Thankfully, my one roommate was just down the road, and he came right home. He's like 6 feet 4 inches, 300 pounds, so he scared my terrifying date away. After that, he would randomly show up at our house and bang on the door and try all the windows to see if any of them were unlatched. Looking back, I should have just called the fucking cops. Thankfully, he gave up on me after about a month. Probably found a new woman to terrorize. Another story here. Guy from school asked me out to dinner. I agreed. He said he wanted to surprise me with the location, which I initially thought was kind of sweet. He also insisted in picking me up in his car. I was young and didn't have reliable transportation, so I agreed. Once we were a few minutes down the road, he announced the name of the restaurant, and that it was an hour and 15-minute drive away. I said that was kind of far, but he waved me off saying he had a reservation and it would be fine. I realized I was trapped, so I rolled with it, thinking how bad could it be since I knew him from class? My mistake. Cut to me ordering my main course. He interrupted me mid-sentence and proceeded to change my order to something else entirely, insisting I'd like it better. No other reason or rationale. I protested. He refused to listen. I protested again, noting I didn't like some of the ingredients in that dish. He repeated his changed order and directed the server to ignore me as I continued protesting. The server stood there, shifting her eyes back and forth, unsure whose direction to follow. It was turning into an argument, and I felt bad for the server, so I acquiesced. Another big mistake. His selection was horrible. Inedible, really. I didn't finish it. He got mad and told me I was wasting food he was paying for. I responded by offering to pay my half of the bill. He refused, saying gentlemen always pay. Gentlemen also respect women's meal selections, but whatever, dude. Don't say I didn't offer. So he paid and we leave. He suggested we go see some sights in the area, but I tell him I don't feel well and just want to go home. He huffs but agrees. On the long drive back home, he interrupts the silence by asking, "So how many people have you slept with?" Totally out of the blue, no context or introduction. I was completely caught off guard. After a few moments, I managed to coolly reply that was none of his business. His response? "Oh, you must be a slut then." What? Wow. Just wow. Crickets the rest of the ride back. He asked me out for a second date a few days later. I said I didn't think that was a good idea. His response? "That's okay. I wasn't really interested anyway." He then spent the rest of the semester making snarky comments toward me and talking loudly about other girls he was dating whenever I was within earshot. Fun times. She wanted to do a picnic of sorts, but it was July, incredibly humid and a bit steamy/rainy that day. She insisted we did the picnic deal. Spent an hour getting this table nicely set up with food, dessert, candles, a nice tablecloth, cushions for us to sit on comfortably. Had never done this, but was trying hard to impress. Was actually quite proud of the end result. She arrives 15 minutes late. There was no connection hardly at all. She was not talkative, despite spending hours on the phone texting for a week leading up to date. She said she loved Latin/Caribbean food, so I got takeout from one of the best places local, a kind of assortment of things. She didn't touch any of it. She sat and looked at the river in the background, and I asked her a couple of times if she was okay. If she would like to move closer to the river? Was there anything I could do to make her more comfortable? And she would just smile and say no, and that it was all wonderful, again, while not touching a single thing except a bottled water she brought. I sat through this for almost an hour. Finally, I just flat out said, "I guess I was expecting a bit more conversation, or at least some engagement in this. I'm sorry it seems this date was a bust." And she just awkwardly smiled and said, "I'm sorry too, I can see you put a lot of effort into it." So because I had nothing to lose, I asked her what was wrong or what I did wrong. And she responds, "Nothing really, I just think this is all a bit overboard for a first date. It's kind of cringe, like you're desperate." I can't even lie. My feelings were pretty hurt as I put together the date based on her cues and questions I had subtly asked. Even went ahead with the gross atmosphere of 90-degree weather and steamy, post-storm humidity. I wanted to respond, but I just bit my tongue and said, "Well, if you're not going to eat, I sure am." And I went to town on the food while she sat there. There was a couple sitting on a swing near us, and I went, "Hey guys, you hungry?" And as it turned out, They were on a date, but were broke, so were just enjoying each other's company, and I invited them over to enjoy the table full of food with me. She left a few minutes after they came over, having said nothing since I started eating. And after she left, I had the best time with these two strangers, eating and laughing and telling them what happened, and both of them telling me I deserved better. I'm still good friends with them some 10 years later now. Never heard from the girl again outside of a single text later that evening saying, "I'm sorry, that was a bitcha thing for me to say to you." I guess expecting me to respond, which I never did, just blocked her number and moved on. Another story from my friend. He showed me his car, and he pulled up a breathalyzer that was installed by the driver's seat. He explained that he had to blow in it or the car wouldn't start, and also every 5 to 10 minutes or so the thing would beep and he would have to blow in it again. He made it seem like it was no big deal. He said jump in, and we can grab dinner. I said I'm just going to drive my own car to the restaurant, because I never let strangers drive me anywhere. He seemed totally shocked but said okay. We got to the restaurant, and he said he didn't have any money, and asked if we could walk around a park instead. I said okay. This park was sketchy and gross. He immediately hiked his leg up really high on a tree like almost doing the splits, and said he had to stretch. He then tried to coax me to walk some isolated trails, and I flat out said no, and that I wasn't comfortable being isolated alone with someone I didn't know. He kept saying, "But you do know me." He then proceeded to talk about a bunch of boring nonsense. He asked if I wanted to go back to his place to have sex. I said no. He then got really annoyed and said he was wasting his time on this pointless date. I said I agree, and I'm leaving. I started walking back to my car, and he said, "Oh, I parked much closer. Let me give you a ride back to your car." And he put his arm around me hard and was basically making it so I couldn't get away. I played dumb and said something like, "Wow, you're so strong, do you work out?" Blah blah. He began walking me to his car without letting me move. I decided to play into it and said, "You know that you're holding me against you, I kinda do want to go back to your place." He lit up and said, "Oh yes, we can have so much fun." We got back to his car and he walked me towards the passenger side. By this point he had let up a bit, thinking I wanted to bang him. My heart started racing and my head was screaming for me to get away. I felt like if I got in that car I was doomed. Suddenly I said, "OMG, what was that?" pointing behind him. He turned to look and I fucking Olympic sprinted away. He started to chase me, screaming at me, but he was too slow. He ran to get back in his car and peeled out trying to follow me. I called 911 and hid. I was able to give them his car and plate and description, etc. He didn't try to find me for long. He left the park and raced away. I stayed hidden until the police came. They drove me back to my car and said they would follow up with me, but that he hasn't technically done anything illegal. After that I only met in public in the daytime for dating. It was scary as fuck. I moved to Utah a few years ago, and I'm an agnostic lesbian, so I knew this would be terrible going in. First girl took me to a bunch of Ted Bundy sites, which admittedly was kind of interesting, but probably should have been a red flag. We slept together a few times, and I tried at one point to ask her a little more about her sexual preferences, so we could explore some things if she liked. She basically screamed, "Don't you want to find out?" And I was like, "I'm okay." Didn't see her again. Seemed like she was still hung up on an ex anyway. Second girl was really cute and had a hot tub, but come to find out she was a raging alcoholic. She had a bunch of gays / by women over for a party, and they were all sloppy drunks and seemed like shitty people. The whole group had fucked and dated each other. They were weirdly aggressive and all wanted to arm wrestle. I love a competition at least, so I was like, bet. I beat them all, and we got to this big bitch. I was doubting I would win this round, but I did. She got butt hurt and demanded we try left-handed. I still beat her, so at least I had that high. I saw her a few more times BC. I was bored and I hate myself. But one morning she called McDonald's and started screaming that she couldn't get chicken nuggies at 9 a.m., and I just couldn't anymore. Next girl was on and off for a while, and she was a lot of fun, but also seemed to have some anger issues or something going on. She had a dream that we were drinking blood one night and woke up flipping out. I had to sit on the couch and contemplate why I was here in Utah trying to date all these religious trauma girls. She got mad that I didn't reassure her it wasn't real. Why do I need to reassure you that I'm not in a blood cult? Later she started dick riding some guy and told me she had to get Plan B and maybe she was bi. Okay, enjoy your journey I guess, but I was past caring at this point, so her jab didn't get a reaction out of me like she wanted. She continued to try to get a rise out of me by mentioning several other partners for the next few months. Finally I went off on her and she got filed in the blocked section with all the others, so I could have blessed peace. I'll gloss over all the girls that think they are poly here, but don't really know what that means. My poly lifestyle died in Utah, BC. Holy hell, it's bad. The last girl I met on Hinge. We went for a short hike and camped for a bit. She was really shy, and I wasn't sure if she even liked me. I cooked shrimp scampi over the fire and massaged her hands. BC, they always hurt her. It started getting late, so we packed up. I sliced the shit out of my hands on my knife in the dark and was bleeding everywhere, but I tried to keep cool about it as I drove her back and didn't say anything. BC, I'm in a demonic blood cult and all. I got out to wish her good night. She gave me the shyest and fastest peck on the lips that completely surprised me, and ran so quickly inside that it seemed like she vaporized into thin air. I was left standing there and was like, okay, I guess she likes me. Anyway, we are married now, and if I can find love in this weird-ass state, then so can you. Another story here for you. I was dating someone I went to middle school with and reconnected with after high school. She had been living with a man she was engaged with, but he kicked her out because he got cold feet. So after finding out she was basically sleeping in the park, I just let her come stay with me. She lived with me for about a year, no issues, I thought. I lost my job, and the house I was renting was sold out from under me at around the same time. So we moved in with some of my family. I asked her to get a job to help make ends meet and pay our cell phone bill. I was already working again at this point. She went and got a job and worked for about 2 months before getting fired and not telling me. She then proceeded to have me or my family take her to work every day and pick her up every day. Then she would have a friend pick her up from the parking lot, and she would go sleep around with every guy she knew and make them pay her so she could hide the fact that she wasn't working anymore. Then one day she got dropped off by her ex, the one that kicked her out. She said that they were just friends when I asked her about it. Found out from one of my other friends later that night that he caught them at a movie theater making out, and she promised that she would sleep with him, my friend, if he didn't tell me. Fast forward 2 days after I actually started asking our mutual friends what was up, she had told them all that I was into reclaiming. I am not. So they never bothered to let me know when they caught her sleeping around because they all thought I was into it. I confront her about it. At this point I knew about 8 guys she was sleeping with and wasn't 100% sure about another 4. She threw a fit, started destroying and throwing around furniture, tipped over a fridge, and pulled a TV off of a wall. All while saying if I was a better boyfriend, I would have just let her sit around at home all day, and I would have paid for everything she wouldn't have had to sleep around. I told her to get out of the house until she calmed down, and we could talk about what to do next. When she gets back 2 days later, she stayed with her ex. She decided to throw a brick at my house trying to break windows, but fortunately she wasn't exactly strong enough. My mom pulled up, she was coming over for dinner, and she threw a brick and hit my mom in the chest. So cops were called, she was arrested. We didn't end up pressing charges on the condition that she gets her stuff, leaves, and never comes back on the property. She does, and I'm there along with one of my friends and an officer. The officer asks me to answer a few questions, and my friend watches her, but doesn't know whose stuff is what. So she comes out, throws a box into her ex's car, and takes off. I got back to my room to find that she stole my PS2 and all of my games, stole my wallet, social security card and birth certificate, and she had cut the power cable to my PC while my friend had run to the bathroom. Told the cop who was still there, and he went and found them and took my wallet, social and birth certificate back, but because I had no proof that the PS2 and games were mine, he couldn't do anything about those. I decided to stay single for about a year after that, but when I go to re-enter the dating pool, I come to find out that she had been dragging my name through the mud at every bar, club, and venue I frequented while we had been together. According to her, I beat her, threw her out without cause, stole her money, attacked her, destroyed all of her things before she could pick them up, ECT. She also did this to 6 of the guys I had contacted and confirmed that she was sleeping with. And even now, 10 years later, I occasionally go on dates, and someone will say, oh wait, you're that guy who beat, and our asterisk his GF a few years ago. Worked out after she was gone that she had ultimately been sleeping with 16 different men, who all thought they were exclusive. And she scammed all of them, and myself, into paying her way for a while there. I would tell you all her names so you can avoid her, but I found out from her mom late last year that she had voluntarily entered treatment for schizophrenia and pathological lying, and I really hope she gets better. I never get bored of telling this one. A few years ago I met this guy whom I'll call Matt. Matt and I had some mutual friends. He invited me to a concert. We lived in different towns, about 15 kilometers apart. The concert was to take place in a third town, about 15 kilometers away from the town he lived in. After the concert, we would go back to his town, and I would sleep at my best friend's house. They both lived in the same town. So Matt comes and picked me up. I had a bag with a few things like pajamas and clothes for the next day. I leave my bag in his car and go to his apartment, because he insisted on me meeting his mom. This was the first red flag for me, because why would you like your mom to meet me on our first date? I ignored it and went to see his mom. For the whole agonizing hour we were there, she talked about his ex, how good-looking she was, how smart she was, how funny, and so on and so forth. She concluded with, "I don't really understand why they broke up." I knew the girl. I didn't like her, which made it even more cringe for me. They had been together for 2 weeks, so it wasn't really that big. I stood through all this tirade stoically, just smiled and nodded until he was ready to leave. I left my bag in his car and left for the concert. I couldn't drink anything as I was on antibiotics for a dental problem, so I gave him my free shot, which all the 15 first girls at the concert received. Besides that shot, he drank a beer. Because of this little quantity of alcohol, he was absolutely wasted, slurring his words, saying stupid things, not walking properly, etc. The concert took place in a bar, and he stopped the concert in the middle of it, telling the band they couldn't sing properly. They gave him a microphone, because he wanted to prove to them he was better. They put 3 instrumentals for him, but not one of them was good. I felt really embarrassed, so I went outside to smoke, not really knowing what to do. While I was smoking a cigarette, one of the singers came outside and started talking to me, mainly making funny remarks about my date. I told him I was sorry for his behavior, but the guy was cool and okay with it. At that moment, Matt came outside and proceeded to accuse me of cheating on him with the singer, because why else would we make conversation? He told me I would have to make it home on my own, and I told him that was okay. I didn't really feel safe going home with him. I took my phone out of my pocket to find someone who could take me home, but my battery was dead. I could not find a charger for my phone in all that bar, so it became a problem, because I didn't want to leave with him, but I also couldn't find any other way back home, as there weren't any buses or trains. One of his friends assured me it was okay. They would safely take me to my friend's house. So we eventually left. We reached his town, and the driver, Matt's friend driving Matt's car, stopped at the end of the street on which my best friend lived. I didn't have time to get out of the car, because Matt, who was in the back seat, caught my hand. I was in the passenger's seat, and told the driver I would spend the night at his place. The driver started arguing with him, and that was when I saw a police car parked right across from us. I said, "If I don't get out of this car this very minute, I will shout as loud as I can." The driver panicked, took Matt's hand away from me. I exited the car, and I was happy. Just a few more steps were between me and my friend's house. But things couldn't stop there, could they? While I was crossing the street, I heard a car door closing behind me. I looked back. Matt was out of the car, coming after me. I started running, knocked on the police car's window, and the policemen exited their car. They asked me what was wrong. I told them. I gave them my ID, and they told me to wait in their car. Matt started shouting at them, calling me stupid, telling them I was a D*UG addict, I was a liar, and so on and so forth. The policeman could see he was drunk, could see I was being calm and eloquent, so they soon realized who to trust. They fined him for talking badly to and about me in front of them. He threatened them they would hear from his lawyer. They just ignored him and got back into the car. They could see where I lived in my ID, so they asked me if I wanted them to take me home. I didn't want to cause any further trouble, so I told them it was okay. I could just go to my friend's house. They insisted on driving me the short distance. Bless their kind souls. I spent the night at my friend's place, and, the next day, I realized my bag was still in his car. I thought about abandoning it. It contained some clothes, some makeup, my hair straightener, and my antibiotics. But my friend told me she would send her mom to take it back from him, being sure he wouldn't cause a scene in front of her mom. So the mom meets him, takes my bag, give it back to me. Everything in the back was ripped, cut, destroyed. Everything. I could not contain myself. I called and cursed him for 5 minutes straight, without repeating myself, and without giving him a chance to say anything. The next day, I heard he had told all his friends that the fine he received was 10 times the amount it actually was. So yeah, none of the other bad dates I ever had beats this one. You know that moment when you're sitting across from someone, and you suddenly realize you've made a huge mistake? Not just a little mistake, like Oh, this person's not my type. But a mistake so colossal you're mentally calculating how quickly you can escape without visibly sprinting out the door or faking a medical emergency. That was me, sitting in a small, trendy cafe in downtown Denver on a chilly Thursday afternoon, regretting every choice that led me to this bumble coffee date. It began nice though. His name was Jack. Honestly, I don't even remember anymore his name. He seemed harmless enough, and after exchanging a few banner-filled messages, I agreed to meet him for coffee. I like to think I had a pretty good radar for creeps, but let me be the first to admit, my radar was broken that day. The moment he walked into the cafe, I knew I was in trouble. Like big trouble. Jake, or Jack, was still wearing his gym clothes. I'm not talking about a casual athleisure vibe either. I'm talking full-on, post-workout, sweat-dripping gym clothes. His gray tank top was soaked through, clinging to his chest and back, and the smell hit me before he even sat down. You know that sour smell of someone who skipped deodorant after a workout? Multiply that by 10. People at nearby tables actually glanced over with scrunched noses as he plopped down across from me. And plopped is the right word. He didn't ease into the chair like a normal person. He flopped into it with the full force of someone who had zero awareness of how much space he was taking up. His gym bag hit the floor with a loud thud, and he leaned back like he owned the place, spreading his arms over the back of the chair and grinning at me like I should be honored by his presence. "Hey," he said, his voice loud enough to turn heads. "You're cuter than your pics." I forced a smile, already regretting my life choices. "Thanks. How was your workout?" "Brutal," he said, wiping his forehead with the back of his hand. "Just finished legs. Didn't even have time to shower. Figured I'd come straight here. Hope you don't mind." Oh, I minded. I minded a lot. But what could I say? I wasn't the type to call someone out on their hygiene 5 seconds into a date. So I just nodded and fiddled with the sleeve of my coffee cup, praying this would somehow get better. Spoiler, it didn't. "So, what do you do for work?" I asked, trying to steer the conversation into safe, neutral territory. He waved the question off like it was boring. "I'm a bouncer," he said, sitting up straighter. "But I'm thinking about getting into real estate. You know, flipping houses, making big money. But yeah, bouncing's my main gig right now. You wouldn't believe the shit I deal with at the club." I offered a polite smile. "Oh, like what?" That was my second mistake, encouraging him. His face lit up, and for the next 20 minutes, he launched into a series of increasingly graphic and disturbing stories about his bouncer adventures. And I don't mean funny anecdotes or quirky mishaps. No, these were full-blown, rage-filled monologues about how he handled idiots at the club. "There was this one guy," he said, leaning forward and slamming his fist on the table for emphasis. "Thought he could shove me and get away with it. So I grabbed him by the collar and bam. He mimed punching someone in the face, complete with sound effects, right in the nose. Blood everywhere. Dude was crying like a little bitch." I flinched, glancing around to see if anyone else was as horrified as I was. A couple sitting nearby exchanged nervous looks before quietly gathering their things and leaving. Jake didn't notice. He was too busy acting out another one of his heroic tales, complete with loud yelling, swearing, and wild hand gestures. "People think they can mess with me," he said, pounding his chest like a gorilla. "But I don't take shit from anyone. You gotta set the tone, you know? Show them who's boss." At this point, I was doing everything I could to keep a neutral expression, but inside, I was screaming. How had I missed the red flags? Was it because he had a dog in his profile? Was I really that gullible? I glanced at the clock on the wall, wondering how much longer I had to endure this without being blatantly rude. Then he dropped the bomb that made me seriously consider running for the door. "You know what pisses me off the most?" he said, leaning back in his chair and crossing his arms. "Drunk, hysterical girls. You know the type, crying, screaming, making a scene. God, they're the worst. If I could, I'd knock their teeth in. Teach them a lesson." He laughed, like he'd just said something funny. I stared at him, my stomach churning. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Did he seriously just joke about hitting women? Or was it not even a joke? Either way, I was done. I forced a tight smile and grabbed my phone, pretending to check a text. "Oh wow," I said, my voice artificially bright. "I just realized I have to go. I forgot I have a meeting in an hour." Jake frowned. "A meeting? At 5? On a Thursday?" "Yep," I said, standing up and grabbing my bag. "Work stuff. You know how it is." He tried to protest, but I was already halfway to the door, practically speed-walking to my car. As soon as I got in, I locked the doors and sat there for a moment, trying to process what had just happened. My hands were shaking. I couldn't believe I'd just spent an hour with someone like that. How had I not seen the warning signs? When I got home, I deleted the Bumble app. I wasn't even going to give him the satisfaction of a thanks but no thanks message. I blocked his number and swore off dating apps for the foreseeable future. The next day, I got a text from an unknown number. "Thought I scared you off," it said, followed by a laughing emoji. I blocked the number immediately, and I haven't heard from him since, luckily. In 2020, I was young and kinda desperate. 17, and just looking for people to hang out with, really. So I met this guy on a dating app. He seemed nice enough. Not my type, but had potential for a glow-up, you could say, so it motivated me to give him a chance. He was 22, and I was stupid. It was a hot summer afternoon. I met up with him on a corner between our houses, and we went for a walk. He was friendly, too friendly. And he stunk. He was absolutely fucking rank. Just imagine the worst body odor you've ever smelled in your life, and times that by 3. Now, I was trying to give him a chance, but he was wanting to hold my hand, and all I could think about was how dirty his fingernails were, how greasy his hair was. OFFS, just thinking about it right now is making me gag. We ended up sitting under a tree to talk, and he beckoned me to sit next to him, where he then put his arm around my shoulders. I turned my head away to just get a whiff of a fresh breeze, because otherwise I'd fucking pass out. He's putting his other hand in my leg, nodding his head, until he says, Yeah, this could definitely be something. Gross. Anyway, I offered to get us ice cream after he made it known he didn't have any money, and we walked him home after that. He lived with his grandparents at the time, in their basement. He offered to show me around, and politely I agreed, until he took us downstairs. We got into this whole virgin talk, you know how it goes. I told him I was, but I wasn't sure if I was ready for that yet. He puts his hand on my knee and tilts his head towards a mystery room. "I can take care of that for you right now." I excused myself and ran home. I burned the shirt and exfoliated like hell when I realized his sweaty BO smell had soaked into my shoulder. I know this may seem like I was super superficial, but like I said, he wasn't really my type, and on paper his interests and hobbies seemed sweet enough. He was just down on his luck currently, so I thought I'd sweep my judgment to the side and give him a chance. Holy fuck, I sometimes feel like I can still smell him. Then we have another story. I actually have a shitty MS Paint comic somewhere I drew about this like 30 years ago, El Mayo. Strapping cost, this one is crazy. Went on a sort of date with a guy at a bar in the city that I frequented to play pool and get some dinner maybe. It was a dead slow night as we were getting some shitty winter weather. I'ma call him Dumbshit Danny. At that point, we were the only 2 people in the bar. Dumbshit Danny started just pounding beers and got beyond wasted. Started badgering me to go home with him. After repeated no's, I finally snapped at him and he lost his shit. Let loose this howling wail and threw himself at my legs. Scream crying, with snot and tears pouring down his face, he started begging me to go home with him. I could not get him loose from my legs and started jabbing him with the pool stick I was holding to get him to let go. I looked up over his head to exchange dumbfounded looks with the equally nonplussed bartender, who finally jumped into action. I think he was so shocked by the guy's behavior that it took him a minute to process. I know I was, having never seen anybody behave like that in my life. Bartender has to drag dude off me and winds up dragging him outside because he won't leave. Dude is ugly, crying the whole time. Oh, but wait, it gets better. Like a dummy, I stuck around too long chatting with the bartender, who was a friend of mine. At first it was kind of a stick around to make sure dude gets gone, but then I got to yakking and lost track of time. Was interrupted by another patron coming in the back who hollered, mad, "There's someone out here kicking your car." Me and the bartender rushed out to find he had gone and gotten his equally drunk friend and come back. The friend was kicking my car and screaming that I was a slut while Dumbshit Danny was laying face down on the ground next to my car. Not passed out, just laying there. I guess he was still crying. What the fuck he was doing. Before any of us sane people had time to process, this little tableau caught the attention of a cop in the Wendy's drive-thru next door. He comes straight over the curb to get to the bar parking lot. Dude kicking my car gets arrested. Dumbshit Danny gets told to GTFO, or he would get arrested too, having been told once already to leave. He slinks off into the night. I hope to never see him again, but that was too hopeful. Because round about 3 a.m. Dumbshit Danny shows up at my house. I still lived with my parents in a small town at the time, a good 45 minutes from the city. This was back in the phone book days, so it wasn't too hard to find my parents' house, the phone book for this town being the size of a magazine, and us having a unique name. My stepdad gets woken up by dumb shit standing in our front yard yelling incoherently. Calls the county sheriff. Dude tries to tell him I invited him over, but nobody is buying it, lol. He finally gets arrested. Bails out. Immediately starts emailing me all this nonsensical shit. Email after email. Finally I wind up having to get a restraining order against the guy. He's sending me hundreds of emails and showing up at the places I hang out. He broke it 3 times, getting arrested all 3 times. Finally, after that last arrest, I never heard from him again. 20 or so years later, I'm at that same bar, and his name comes up in conversation. I asked what happened to the guy as I'd known him back in the 90s. I did not mention any of the history I had with him. Just dumbass Danny. I used to know him. Whatever happened to him? Apparently he had a bad breakup and moved to California in 00. It's me. I was the bad breakup LMAO nutbag. For warning, this is going to be a long one. So a few years back, I went on a date with a guy I met on Tinder. I know this should have been my first red flag. I was 23 at the time, and he was 22. We had been talking for a while, and he seemed normal enough, so when he asked me on a brunch date, I said yes. He wanted to pick me up, and I stupidly agreed. So it all started off normal. The conversation was okay, and he was nice, but I wasn't really feeling it. Well, come the end of our meal, he says that he has a few more hours before he has to work and wants to keep hanging out. I couldn't come up with a good excuse not to, so instead of taking it back to a house, I suggested I show him around town a little. He was new to the area and said okay. So, after driving around for about an hour and a half, his truck starts overheating. He jumps out and checks under the hood and realizes that he got a hole in his radiator. So we head back to my place, and I told him that he could hang out for a bit and wait for his truck to cool down a bit, so he could get back home, but I had to work on a few things. He comes in, and I offer him a beer since I was going to have one while I worked on painting some cornhole boards for work. I turned on my TV and let him play some music. After I'm working outside for about an hour, I come back inside to find him completely trashed and bawling on my couch. He had finished the rest of the beer in my fridge and helped himself to a bottle of vodka he had found and had almost polished off a brand new bottle. I just froze. I ended up stepping back outside and called my mom to ask for advice. She could hear him wailing and singing at the top of his lungs in the background. I couldn't just send him on his way, as he was way too drunk to drive. So after talking to my mom for a bit, I went inside and told him I had some errands to run and I would drop him off at his place. He asked if he could just hang out at my house while I was gone. I told him hell no, as I actually know this man. So finally I get him to get his shoes on and out of the house, and he said he needs just a minute to say bye to his truck. He then proceeded to talk to his truck for 5 minutes before I could get him in my car. I drive him home with him, insisting on blaring the music as loud as it can go. When we got there, I told him I could stop by before work tomorrow and drive him back to his car. He said okay, but he needs help getting inside. Mind you, this man is like 6 feet 4 inches, and I'm a solid 5 feet 1 inch. So I get out and have to help this man get inside and lay him on his bed. He starts confessing that he is so happy I'm putting up with him, and that most everyone else wouldn't do this for him. I just say okay, and tell him I see him in the morning. It's like 5 o'clock at this point, so I think I'm done with this chaos until morning. I run my errands and get home around 9, and start putting away groceries. I had left my phone on the charger in the living room, and didn't think anything of it. I came back to my phone about 30 minutes later to 10 missed Snapchat calls. I never gave him my real number, and 4 voice messages. I listened to them, and all of them are him screaming at me to give him his truck back now, or he's going to freak out, and that he's walking to my house now to get his shit back. Honestly, it was all very threatening. So I freak out a little, and all of a sudden he's calling again. I pick up, and he immediately starts screaming the same things. I just asked him why he thought I was stealing his truck, when I told him I would bring it back in the morning. Well, apparently, he didn't remember that, and then asked for a ride the rest of the way. At this point, I just said yes so I could get this over with and get him out of my life. I called my mom, and had her on the other line the whole time, just in case this guy tried to pull anything crazy. So I get him back to my place, and he asks if he could come grab his wallet that he left there. Again, my dumbass said fine instead of just getting it myself. So he comes in, and then asks if he can just stay cause he's still drunk. I finally lose my shit. I ask him why the hell he started walking to my house in the first place if he couldn't fucking drive, and what his plan was. His response, I was just going to sleep in my truck. I told him to fuck off, and that I was done, and he and his precious truck needed to get off my property now. He finally leaves, but not before asking for another drink, and me screaming at him to get out. I sit down and just start bawling, praying this was all over, and I would never have to deal with him again. Well, I was so wrong. The next morning my work, I relay this to my co-workers, and just ask them to let me know if they see him or his truck hanging around. Then my bartender comes up and said there was a call for me. I answer, and lo and behold, it's him. I ask him why the hell he was calling, and apparently he went and got himself arrested the night before. My guess would be drunk driving, and wanted me to bail him out. I told him hell no. I then called the prison themselves and asked to be notified when he is released, because I don't trust that he wouldn't try to contact me or just show up. So they set me up with text notifications, and I go on my way. He got released like 3 days later and did try to text me, but I just ignored them. I didn't want to block him, just in case he did try anything. I would have all the messages saved. Luckily, after those few texts, I never heard from him again, and I immediately deleted Tinder off my phone. So, it all started when I agreed to meet this guy for dinner and drinks. Bumble match, a few chats between us, and then the inevitable, let's meet and see where this goes. He suggested this restaurant/bar kind of place, which had sounded alright, to be honest. My sort of place. I'm not picky about venues as long as the vibe's decent and the company isn't trash. Oh boy, was I wrong. The moment I arrived, there he was, already seated, looking way too pleased with himself. He was the kind of guy who screams try hard without even opening his mouth, but of course, he did open his mouth, and then it all went downhill. The whole conversation was like a TED Talk nobody asked for. He was flexing about his life, his job, his car, his gym routine, and it was all so unnecessarily extra. He told me he bench pressed some ungodly weight, like 120 kilograms or something, and then segued into how his boss loves him because he dominates every project. I mean, okay, congrats, but what am I supposed to do with this information? Frame it? I tried to steer the conversation into something a little less self-obsessed, like, oh, so what do you do for fun? Big mistake. He went off about how he's a high-energy person who's always on the move, rattling off a list of hobbies that sounded more like a LinkedIn profile than an actual human being's interests. I do CrossFit, I hike, I play rugby with the boys, and sometimes I just need to unwind with a good cigar, you know? No, I don't know, but thanks for sharing. By the time the food arrived, I was already mentally planning my escape route. I had ordered 1 main and a pint of beer to keep things simple, but this guy, oh no, he was living his best life. He ordered 6 pints of Guinness, back to back, like it was some kind of personal challenge, and a steak that cost more than my monthly phone bill. Honestly, I wasn't judging the amount he ordered, but the way he downed those pints like a frat boy at happy hour? Questionable behavior for a grown man. Anyway, the bill came, and this is where things hit peak cringe. The total was around $250, and I swear to you, 75% of that was just his beer. I was fully prepared to pay my share, because I always do, but before I could even say anything, he took one look at the bill, smirked, and said, with the waitress standing right there, "Wow, restaurants love me, man, because I spend so much money." I nearly choked on my own breath. Who does that? The poor waitress just stood there, awkwardly holding the bill folder like, "Okay, dude, can you just pay and let me do my job?" I was so mortified for her that I blurted out, "Can you STFU, she's right beside you," and gave her my best "I'm so sorry you have to deal with this" look. She smiled politely, but I could tell she was dying inside, just like me. He finally paid the bill, thank God, but karma had other plans for him. As we were leaving, this man walked straight into a glass door. Deadass, full-on collision. I don't even know how it happened because the door wasn't even subtle. It had a giant handle and everything. The loud thunk was all I needed to confirm that the universe has a sense of humor. He tried to play it off like it didn't hurt, but I could see the red mark forming on his forehead. I had to bite my lip to keep from laughing. We headed outside to book a grab, and honestly, I was counting the seconds until I could go home. While we were waiting, he whipped out a cigarette and lit it up, blowing smoke directly into the air like he was in some noir movie. Then he turned to me and asked, "Do you smoke?" I told him no, that I'd quit cigarettes, thinking that would be the end of it. But no, of course not. This guy actually tried to force his cigarette into my mouth, like some kind of nicotine evangelist. "Aya, just smoke la," he said, waving it in my face. "You also gonna smoke again eventually." At this point, I was just staring at him, wondering if he was real or some kind of elaborate prank. Like, sir, what part of I've quit sounds like please peer pressure me into ruining my lungs again? I leaned back and said, yeah, that's not happening, thanks. And he gave me this weird look, like I'd just turned down a winning lottery ticket. Unreal. Then came the cherry on top of this already disastrous evening. He asked if I knew where he lived, and I said, oh, East Side, because I vaguely remembered his Bumble profile mentioning something about the East. And then he goes, oh, I stay Jew Chiat area. You know where that is? All the landed houses. The way he said it, like he was name-dropping a luxury brand, made me want to throw my phone into traffic. Congratulations on living near expensive real estate, I guess? What do you want, a medal? And then, as if the night couldn't get any worse, he started trying to convince me to go home with him. I had already made it crystal clear that I wasn't looking for casual sex, but this guy just didn't get the memo. He kept saying stuff like, come on, I'll take care of you, and you'll have fun, I promise. When I shut him down for the 5th time, he leaned back, sighed dramatically, and said, fine, but when I get home, I'm gonna jerk off so hard while thinking of you. I kid you not. Those were his exact words. I think my soul left my body for a second. I just stared at him, completely speechless. Like, what do you even say to that? Thanks for sharing? Good luck with that? I was so done at this point that I just stood up and said, my grab's here, bye. It wasn't even here yet, but I didn't care. I just needed to get away from him immediately.